The next form of consciousness that we're going to be looking at is that of plants. And it's actually a really, really special configuration. I deeply enjoyed learning about this. However, before we get into it, I wanted to just acknowledge that my voice isn't the best right now. I'm just recovering from a throat infection, and I probably should have waited a few more days before I recorded this, but I've just been really wanting to share about this, and I hope the audio is good enough for you all. So, the design of plants. I think one of the first things that you immediately look at that becomes very obvious is that it's upside down. The design is upside down. The forms that we've discussed so far, which is the inanimate and that of cells, both receive their conditioning in a similar way to human beings, which is upright and at an 88-degree angle. However, plants receive their conditioning from the earth. So all of the conditioning that is coming through all of the planets and stars and imprinting agents is received by the earth and then moved into the plants. Ra even says that plants have their ass up to us or their ass up to the sun, even though we talk about that there would be no plant life without the sun. Actually, truthfully, there would be no life at all without the sun. As we know now, it is the sun that is maintaining and creating all life itself, that is enabling this Maya to exist. The second thing to notice here is that this is actually the first form that has a personality crystal. That this is actually the first form out of all the forms so far that actually has the capacity to display some kind of personality consciousness. Granted, it's a very primitive personality consciousness that isn't that distinctive, but nevertheless, this is the first form in the evolution of forms that has a personality crystal. So, therefore, forms on this planet have evolved from instruments of consciousness to now finally having an expression of consciousness. The next point to note here is that in addition to having a generative identity, plants also have survival intuition. So there is the presence of an awareness center. There is the presence of a mechanism that ensures its survival. And what we also see is the beginning of integration. And as we know from studying the integration channels in human beings, that integration is the bedrock of survival on this planet. And therefore, it's not a surprise that plants actually have their own kind of integration, that their survival is ensured by this survival awareness, which is generated, which also has a specific behavior which empowers its survival. So already we can see that form has evolved quite a lot from when it was just existing as cells, that now it has the possibility to display some kind of personality consciousness, that now it has the availability of awareness, which it didn't have before. By the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but in the design of the inanimate and that of cells, I was very careful to show that we only have the presence of a design crystal, and therefore any activation that can exist can only be colored in red. However, this is the first form in which you can have activations through the personality crystal, and therefore we have the presence of the color black. I also wanted to mention that whenever I'm discussing any form of consciousness, I have their type laid down at the bottom here below. But it's really important to note that this is only for understanding what their relatively larger function is. It is not that every plant that exists is a generator or every cell that exists is a generator, because it's not necessary that they do get imprinted with these activations. They may or they may not. And actually, Ra makes it very clear that most of the forms that we've discussed so far are reflectors. It's because the genetic matrix is actually quite limited. It's not like it is for us as human beings, where we have 64 potentials that can be activated when we have a matrix that's 1, 2, 3, 4 gates. You can understand that not all of them are going to be activated. And actually, most plants are going to be reflectors. However, when we look at their larger pattern, we can understand that they have this role of a generator. I think that shows us that they are here to build the planet that we are on, that they are here to build and grow all of the other forms of consciousness that exist on the planet. And actually, when we look at their design as well, that becomes really, really clear that plants are actually designed to be allies to other forms, that plants are actually designed to sacrifice for other forms, for the existence and the development of other forms. When we look at gate 15 in plants, we can see that this is the gate that is responsible for creating the diverse patterns that we see in plants. We can see that unlike the design of cells, we don't have the gate 5 here. We don't have a set growth pattern. What we have is an openness to set growth pattern, which leads to a lot of diversity. And it is this gate, the 15th gate, that makes it possible for plants to integrate with many, many different species and play different roles in their development and their evolution. Plants are the only forms of consciousness that are open to other forms of consciousness in terms of what their pattern is going to be. In essence, a plant is not here to dominate you with its pattern. However, it is here to be your ally. It is here to provide you awareness. It is here to provide you life. It is here to provide you with self-love, provided that you interact with it correctly. Plants have this ability to perfect their form for survival. They have the awareness to behave in a way that empowers their survival. They also have the power to individuate, to behave in a way that brings about individuation. And so what we can see is that it is through the gate 15 that plants have the power to homogenize others, to pull others into its extremes once its environment, once its pattern is established by the forces outside it. This is why plants are considered one of the biggest homogenizing force on the planet. This is why Ra talks about how people in different areas that consume certain kind of plants begin to display similar kinds of diseases or begin to have similar kind of personalities or consciousness, it's because they're consuming the same homogenizing force over and over and over again. But it's not plants are only a homogenization force. They are also a force that helps you individuate. They're also a force that helps you develop awareness. They're also a force that helps you love yourself, provided you interact with it correctly. So plants are the only form of consciousness that are designed to sacrifice, that are designed to be allies to all other forms, but it depends on the form itself what the impact of the plant is going to be on them. Also, one of the sweetest observation that Ra mentioned was that it is because of the plant's ability to be itself. And also, plants don't have a neocortex. They don't have a mind that comes in and distorts their behavior, right? So, because plants have this ability to be themselves, that human beings have actually come to use plants to enhance their own experience of life. This is why whenever we think someone is beautiful or we want to make someone feel happy or we appreciate someone, we give them flowers, right? Or in my tradition, whenever we go to someone else's house, we bring them food. It's because food enhances your love for yourself and it also enhances your ability to survive. Plants actually feed our potential for intelligence and enhance our strategic capacity. When we study the design of plants and all other designs of forms of consciousness, it becomes very, very clear that plants are here to have a deep connection with all other forms of planet. What is also interesting to note here is that not only are plants open to a generative pattern, but they're also open to expressing themselves. And when we look at the design of insects, which is the one that we're going to be looking at next, we'll see how insects empower plants to express themselves in the form of, say, for example, flowers. It is because it is not a necessity for plants to express themselves as beautiful. However, it is something that's possible through interaction with other species, through interaction with other forms of consciousness. So plants have the design of survival through diverse patterns. This is why they also follow the law of extremes, because they can exist and adapt to all kinds of extremes and can establish a perfection of patterns in many, many different environments and around many, many different forms of consciousness. Ra was also told by the voice that the aura of plants is compressed to their surface. So it isn't necessary for us to consume plants in order for us to interact with plants or in order for us to get the benefits that we can from plants. But actually, they're a really great way of helping plants grow, and also a really great way of receiving benefits from plants is to interact with them when they are alive and to touch them. I actually have been on this quest of, ever since I found out about this, of touching different plants. And you can sense that there is a slight subtle difference between two different plants, even though they're growing in the same environment, which is my home. They don't have this big, massive aura that human beings do, or some of the other forms do. Their aura is actually very close to their surface. So in order for us to really sense it, we have to touch it. We have to have it in our hands, or we have to have it inside our body. The next form of consciousness in the evolution of consciousness on this planet is that of insects. What we see here is that just like in the plants, we have the presence of a personality crystal. Also, an interesting thing to note that when it comes to human beings, we know that our personality crystal is actually housed somewhere above or at the edges of the head center, meaning that our personality crystal isn't even fully integrated into our physical form. However, when it comes to all of the other forms, the personality crystal in these forms are very much inside the design itself. And I think that tells us something about our own form and the role of personality in this form versus in this design. So, anyway, we have the presence of a personality crystal, we have a generative identity, we have awareness. And what we also have, in addition to all of that, is expression of identity, is this throat center that hasn't existed in any of the other forms of consciousness yet. What we also see here, which is actually quite different from what we've discussed so far or what we are even aware of when it comes to the design of human beings, is that although there is some integration aspects here, there seems to be this gap, this breakdown in the integration system. And actually, insects have a different kind of integration system, which doesn't quite operate like ours. So, insects have this awareness of vibration, and it is what gives them the power to survive. However, all of this awareness, this survival power is channeled through the 515, which fixes them in a collective pattern. And this is why insects actually are not differentiated. And the only way that they can actually differentiate is through special differentiation. So you can't really tell a bee apart from a bee unless it's a bumblebee that's different from a honeybee. All honeybees essentially look the same. All bumblebees look the same unless there are different species of bees itself. So we see that bees have, or insects rather, have this survival power as a collective species, which is why you will never really see insects individually creating something. They're always surviving together as a collective. And so, what we see here is that insects are the first form of consciousness on this planet that actually have a collective consciousness. Actually, differentiation is a disease in insects. So, what we see here is that awareness is generating a collective pattern of survival that is being expressed in the now. This is why insects live by the law of no tomorrow. It's because their existence is in the now. An insect does not consider the past. It has no such thing as memory. An insect is not invested in the future. It is only invested in expressing itself in the now in order to continue surviving as a collective species. And actually, insects have the design of a manifesting generator. And so it is in their design, it is in their role to continue generating their species and to continue initiating their existence all over the planet. Insects are actually 90% of the biomass of the entire planet. It is just that they don't exist in the realms that we exist in. Most of the insects exist underground, and we don't live underground, and therefore we actually don't have cognizance of how many insects there really are on this planet, but it is 90% of the biomass of the entire planet. So these insects are truly generating their survival and initiating their existence on this planet, continuously expressing themselves in the now and expanding their territory. We think that plants are everywhere, but actually it's the insects that are everywhere. Insects not only exist on land, but they also exist in water, which is a large part of our planet. So I think that gives us an idea of what a powerful, responsive force insects really, truly are. And because they have this ability to express themselves in the now, it's very hard for us or any form of consciousness to ignore them. It's because they make their presence known through their hum, through their bites. They make themselves known. What we can also see here that is slightly different is that while in the design of plants we have a hanging 15, and in the design of cells we have a hanging 3, and in the design of the inanimate we have the hanging 25, the design of insects we actually don't have a hanging gate, and yet we know that insects are very much capable of interacting with other forms of consciousness. And the way that they interact with other species is through this bridge that we have here in the integration system. So any human being that has the channel of the brainwave or perfected form or archetype or power or exploration are beings that are conditioned by insects and that can condition insects. We can also see why now that insects have a fundamental relationship with plants, because the only gate that plants are missing in the integration system is gate 20. And this is why insects actually help plants express themselves in unique ways. So we can see that as forms began to develop on this planet and evolve over time, that different forms started to bring forward different expressions of consciousness. And it is not that any forms of consciousness exist in isolation on this planet, but that every form of consciousness is designed to interact with other forms of consciousness in order to evolve and grow and to develop self-reflective consciousness. And actually, life would not be possible without these fundamental forms of consciousness that we have discussed so far. It is because of these forms of consciousness that design principle could evolve in the way that it has and get to the place that it has. I, for one, can never look at an insect the same or a plant the same. Whenever I look at a plant, I always have this urge to touch it, to experience it, and to experience its consciousness, and to experience this intelligence that it brings to me. I also can never ever see insects in the same way. Like I can always see this penetrative presence in the now that is just undeniable. And I can see the interaction between insects and plants in a way that I never could have seen before. And I can see what they bring to our lives and how they make life possible. And it has completely transformed how I experience them.